We are launching into an exploration of a modern-day cautionary tale, one that sits squarely at the intersection of, well, digital fame, the wellness industry, and just spectacular fraud.
Hmm.
This is the intensely scrutinized story of Annabelle Natalie Gibson, who became globally famous simply as Belle Gibson.
Right.
She was an Australian wellness influencer who constructed an entire multi-million-dollar empire built on a foundation of calculated deception, fabricated terminal illnesses, and grossly misrepresented charitable giving.
And that's what we're going to examine today.
When we examine the source material for this conversation, we are doing more than just charting the spectacular rise and devastating fall of a single figure.
No, this is much bigger than that.
Our mission here is to conduct an impartial analysis of the mechanics of this fraud. We really need to understand how rapidly accumulated digital fame can be exploited, weaponized, in some cases, to promote dangerous pseudoscience and, critically, to mislead an audience that is often highly vulnerable and, desperately searching for hope or a miracle cure.
That is the essential context we must maintain throughout this analysis. We plan to dissect Gibson's carefully constructed healing bell persona, track the rapid, enormous commercial success of her Deceit, the whole pantry mobile application and companion cookbook,
And then get into the details.
and detail the specific nature of her deceit concerning both her own health and the supposed philanthropy that justified her profits. Then we must review the complex and often difficult legal and enforcement consequences that followed.
It's vital to frame this story within the broader phenomenon of health fraud.
Absolutely vital. In today's world, where there is a constant, overwhelming flood of information, and often misinformation, misleading people who are actively seeking medical guidance is a profoundly harmful act.
Especially when they're at their most vulnerable.
That's it, exactly. This is especially true for those facing serious or terminal illness who may be seeking alternative paths out of fear or desperation. Our primary sympathy must lie firmly with those individuals and families who are directly affected by her false claims, those who sought genuine help and hope only to find themselves betrayed by a manufactured fantasy.
So let's start right at the genesis of the persona, looking at the raw biographical material presented in the sources.
Okay.
Annabelle Natalie Gibson was born on October 8th, 1991 in Launceston, Tasmania. But even her foundational story, the narrative she presented to the public, quickly proved to be inconsistent and slippery once investigated.
That pattern of fabrication was present from the beginning, long before the cancer claims even started. The sources reveal a shaky personal history that contributed to the later narrative instability.
How so?
For instance, her formal education records show she attended Wynnum State High School in Queensland, but she dropped out quite early, specifically in year 10. Yet, when she became famous, she publicly claimed to have been homeschooled, suggesting an effort to sort of smooth over the reality of her upbringing and education.
And the details she provided about her early life were often complex and contradictory, frequently designed, it seems, to elicit maximum sympathy and create a dramatic, resilient backstory.
Yes. She often spoke about having had an unstable upbringing.
Right. She claimed to have left her family home in Brisbane at the remarkably young age of 12.
She did, alleging she had to live first with a classmate and then later with a family friend. She also told one interviewer that her mother had changed her name 5 times when she was young, painting this picture of radical instability.
It cultivated the image of a self-made survivor.
Exactly. Someone who had overcome immense odds, a perfect platform for claiming she had also overcome an impossible medical challenge.
But the deeper the sources dig into these personal details, the more discrepancies emerge, suggesting this pattern of narrative fabrication was, deeply ingrained.
Precisely. Here's one of the more peculiar factual inconsistencies uncovered later. Corporate filings and other official documents suggested she was actually 3 years younger than the age she consistently claimed in public interviews and on her profiles.
So even her age was a fabrication.
It seems so. These small details, when you add them all up, show that narrative fabrication wasn't just limited to her illness. It was woven throughout her personal history, establishing a habit of reshaping reality for public consumption.
This carefully managed, unstable backstory eventually served as the emotional bedrock for the brand that would explode onto the wellness scene. In 2012, Gibson launched her pivotal Instagram account labeled @HealingBell. This entire account was founded on one central, extremely powerful, and ultimately fraudulent claim.
That she had aggressive brain cancer, which she was successfully managing or even curing, entirely through radical nutrition and lifestyle changes, bypassing conventional medicine.
And the response was not just positive, it was immediate and phenomenal.
It was. It really reflected a deep public yearning for these kinds of narratives. The sources indicate that the account amassed an astonishing 200,000 followers within just 1 year.
Wow.
This incredibly rapid digital validation, the sheer numbers, gave her personal, unverified claims immense perceived legitimacy in the eyes of the public and, critically, in the eyes of commercial partners.
That rapid success then paved the way for the major commercial launch. In August 2013, she launched the Whole Pantry mobile app.
And this wasn't a slow build. It was a phenomenon right out of the gate. She was only 21 years old at the time.
The numbers are just staggering for a startup app in that space.
They really are. It was downloaded 200,000 times within the first month alone, and crucially, it received a massive corporate endorsement.
From Apple.
From Apple, one of the most influential technology companies in the world, which voted it the best food and drink app of 2013. That type of validation moves a product from a niche wellness blog to a globally recognized piece of technology.
The financial scale of this success, based entirely on a fabricated premise, really underscores just how persuasive and compelling the Healing Belle persona was.
Absolutely. By early 2015, just over 2 years after the app's launch, estimates suggested that sales from the Whole Pantry app and the subsequent companion book exceeded $1 million.
$1 million.
To contextualize that, this is significant revenue generated by a young entrepreneur in a very short amount of time, based entirely on a fabricated story of survival.
And this commercial success immediately led to major corporate validation, solidifying her status far beyond the reach of a typical blogger.
For sure. She secured a high-profile book deal, signing with Lantern Books, which is an imprint of the established Penguin Books. The companion cookbook was published in October 2014.
But perhaps the biggest indicator of her acceptance into the mainstream corporate world came in September 2014.
The Apple partnership.
When she worked directly with Apple Inc. to integrate her product into their ecosystem.
Yes. Apple selected the Whole Pantry app to be a privileged, pre-installed, default third-party inclusion for the launch of the highly anticipated Apple Watch in April 2015.
That is an unbelievable level of access and trust granted by a major tech company. It secured her status not just as a successful influencer, but as a major media and technology partner.
Placing her brand in front of millions of potential new customers globally.
And she clearly intended for this massive growth to continue.
Oh, absolutely. The sources note she registered the domain The Whole Life, intending to expand the brand beyond the initial recipes and cancer narrative. She even advertised in late 2014 to recruit an IT specialist to manage this ambitious expansion of her brand portfolio.
So the machine she built was complex, profitable, and designed for continuous exponential growth.
All fueled by her tragic inspirational lie.
The core of the entire brand, the engine that drove the corporate endorsements and the million-dollar revenue, was the illness narrative itself. But this wasn't just a vague claim. It was a dizzying series of specific, dramatic, and ultimately contradictory health claims that grew more complex over time.
The scale of the deception regarding her health is almost unbelievable. The list of cancers she falsely claimed to have had is startlingly long, encompassing multiple aggressive pathologies.
What are we talking about here?
We're talking about brain cancer, blood cancer, spleen cancer, uterine cancer, liver cancer, and kidney cancer. She was claiming to be simultaneously battling 6 aggressive forms of cancer across multiple organ systems.
Wait, 6 cancers? That is medically absurd and should have been a screaming red flag to anyone in the medical community. How did she maintain credibility for her followers with such an impossible diagnosis list?
That's the nature of the ecosystem she operated in, built on aspiration and emotion, not clinical fact. She didn't just claim the diseases. She even fabricated a cause for these multiple cancers.
The Gardasil vaccine.
Falsely attributing them to a reaction to the Gardasil cervical cancer vaccine. This specific claim added another layer of controversy, urgency, and perceived victimization to her story, tapping into growing anti-vaccination sentiment among some segments of the population.
Yeah. And the internal inconsistencies in the timeline she presented, even if a follower wasn't tracking her full history, were remarkable.
They absolutely were. Consider this contradiction found in the sources. In November 2014, she claimed in the preface of her book that she had been stable for 2 years now with no growth of the cancer.
Which implies remission.
Or at least a managed disease. Yeah. Yet just 3 months prior, in August 2014, she had posted on Facebook that her cancer had aggressively spread to her brain, blood, spleen, and uterus.
Those two things just can't be true at the same time.
These timelines simply could not align with a medically stable condition, revealing a consistent need to dramatically rewrite her status based on whatever narrative provided the most recent engagement.
The dramatic claims didn't stop at the cancer diagnoses either.
No, her supposed medical history was impossible to substantiate, including claims of undergoing heart surgery several times, actually dying momentarily on the operating table, and suffering a stroke.
All of which served to elevate her status from a cancer survivor to a genuine medical miracle.
Right. But when investigative journalists later pressed her on these intensely dramatic claims, the foundation crumbled. She couldn't substantiate her medical history.
No documents, no doctors.
She was unable to provide verifiable documentation or even name the doctors who had supposedly diagnosed and treated her for these life-threatening conditions. Furthermore, the physical evidence was absent. She did not bear the surgical scars that would be expected from the purported multiple heart operations.
It was pure fiction.
It was fiction intended for maximum dramatic effect and pity.
So, while the entire premise was based on her successfully beating these conditions through natural methods, what exactly was the danger inherent in the pseudoscience she promoted?
That's a critical distinction to make.
Because things like exercise and good eating are fine, but she went much further.
That distinction is, unfortunately, often lost on vulnerable patients searching for answers. Promoting exercise and healthy eating is, of course, uncontroversial and beneficial. The true danger lies in the specific, unverified, and actively harmful practices she advocated for and implicitly endorsed by claiming they saved her life.
What were these specific practices?
The sources confirm she actively promoted Gerson therapy, a highly controversial form of alternative medicine.
Right, that's the one with the juicing and...
For those unfamiliar, Gerson therapy involves an extreme regimen of intense juicing, supplements, and, famously, repeated coffee enemas, which its proponents claim can cure cancer and other chronic diseases by detoxifying the body.
And it's completely rejected by mainstream medicine.
Clinicians and reputable medical organizations universally reject Gerson therapy as unproven and potentially harmful, especially because it encourages patients to reject proven conventional treatment methods.
And she also pushed anti-vaccination positions and the consumption of non-pasteurized raw milk, which carries its own set of health risks.
Precisely. The advocacy for these scientifically unsound methods is what transforms her fraud from a simple business scam into a public health hazard.
The sources draw a chilling, real-world connection here.
Mentioning that Gibson actually attended the funeral of another high-profile Australian wellness blogger, Jessica Ainscough, who also promoted Gerson therapy before tragically dying from cancer in February 2015.
That anecdote is critical because it illustrates the lethal seriousness of the advice being shared in this corner of the wellness sphere. A person is dying from rejecting conventional treatment, and Gibson, who fabricated her own survival, is there reinforcing the narrative of natural cures.
This is where we move past personal fabrication and into quantifiable risk. The sources quote Gibson herself claiming to have countless times helped others to forego conventional medical treatment for cancer and other serious conditions, leading them down a natural therapy path.
She actually claimed that.
Yes. She claimed her advice helped people with everything from fertility and depression to bone damage and various types of cancer.
That online influence, where an inspirational story, even a fake one, is substituted for professional, evidence-based medical guidance, is incredibly hazardous for the audience.
Well, for someone facing a genuine terminal diagnosis, abandoning proven, life-extending treatment based on the promise of a miraculous natural cure has potentially fatal consequences.
This specific type of advocacy, telling vulnerable people to reject proven medicine based on a fabricated personal success story, is what elevated the legal and moral severity of her fraud.
It demonstrates the potential, profound, and often untraceable harm of her influential advocacy to an audience seeking desperately for a glimmer of hope.
If the health claims were the absolute foundation of her fame and commercial success, the charitable claims were the supposed moral justification for the staggering profits she was making.
Yes, she carefully crafted an image of herself, not just as a survivor, but as a selfless philanthropist who was using her commercial success to finance life-saving efforts for others.
And the claims were truly expansive and grandiose.
They were. Gibson stated publicly and repeatedly throughout 2014 that the whole pantry had donated approximately $300,000 to various causes.
And the list of beneficiaries was broad and compelling.
Very. Maternal health care in developing nations, essential medical support for children battling cancer, and funding schools in sub-Saharan Africa.
She actively used these claims to bolster her professional profile. The sources confirmed she listed herself as a philanthropist on her LinkedIn profile.
And she claimed to be actively working with 20 different charities when the app was being promoted for the Apple Watch launch in late 2014. This created a sense of massive, impactful global effort powered by her app sales.
But the reality is, methodically uncovered by subsequent media investigations, was dramatically and pitifully different.
When investigators tried to track the claimed $300,000 in donations, they found that only an estimated $7,000 could actually be verified as having been donated.
Just 7,000 out of a promised 300,000.
That is a staggering 97% discrepancy between the promise and the reality. Furthermore, the timing of those few verified donations is incredibly revealing.
Suggesting a frantic attempt to cover her tracks.
It absolutely does. The sources note that investigators determined that at least $1,000 of that verified $7,000 was reportedly donated only after she became aware that Fairfax Media was conducting a serious, in-depth investigation into her claims.
A last-minute scramble.
It suggests a last-minute scramble to provide the bare minimum of proof of philanthropy when her integrity was under threat.
There was also another small detail regarding the structure of the payments.
Another $1,000 of the confirmed total was reportedly donated to a cause under her partner Clive Rothwell's name, rather than under Gibson's name or the company name, further muddying the waters regarding her direct corporate commitment to charity.
The deception became particularly egregious and deeply personal when it targeted vulnerable people who were actually experiencing the reality she was faking.
Yes. The sources detail a specific heartbreaking instance involving the parents of a young child with genuine brain cancer. Gibson had sought out and befriended them, claiming sympathy and shared experience.
The parents came forward to report their profound sense of betrayal. They were completely unaware that Gibson had been publicly claiming to fundraise for their child's treatment on their behalf, using their tragedy as content.
And they subsequently never received any of the supposed funds raised through her efforts.
The violation of trust here is immense.
It is. The family later grew suspicious, noting that based on the specific probing details Gibson was asking about their child's illness and treatment regimen, they realized she was likely using their genuine devastating circumstances, the details of a real brain cancer diagnosis, to bolster her own fraudulent claims.
She was essentially utilizing a sick child's reality as a factual blueprint to make her fantasy seem more authentic and profitable. So, while she was actively failing to deliver on the promised hundreds of thousands in charitable donations, the media and investigators began to simultaneously raise serious questions about how she was spending the income.
The sources paint a very clear picture of financial irresponsibility and self-indulgence. They describe her as funding a profligate lifestyle, entirely sourced from this fraudulent enterprise.
What did that include?
This included renting an upscale townhouse, leasing a luxury car, paying for premium office space, undergoing expensive cosmetic dental procedures, purchasing designer clothes, and taking numerous international holidays.
All of this was reportedly sourced from her company revenue, including funds that should have been routed directly to charitable organizations as promised.
This sharp contrast between the claimed selfless sacrifice of a cancer survivor and the reality of her lavish, unearned spending solidified the emerging narrative of calculated deceit for profound personal profit, which is precisely the behavior that attracted the attention of consumer protection agencies in Australia.
Given the sheer scale of the fraud, the entire carefully constructed digital structure was destined to crumble.
Inevitably.
And, perhaps predictably, the process began not with regulators, but with an insider. The sources clearly identify Gibson's close friend, Chanel McAuliffe, as the initial whistleblower.
In February 2015, McAuliffe, having grown suspicious over the inconsistencies in Gibson's illness and charitable claims, took the decisive step of confronting Gibson directly.
And what happened?
When Gibson refused to admit the truth or halt the dangerous claims, McAuliffe, recognizing the gravity and potential harm involved, reported her serious suspicions to journalists at The Age. This news outlet quickly recognized the public interest and the severity of the potential fraud and broke the first major story that initiated the collapse.
Gibson's immediate reaction was pure denial and aggressive damage control.
A coordinated attempt at digital erasure. Once the controversy surfaced, the whole pantry company administrators began systematically deleting critical comments on its public Facebook page, attempting to manage the narrative by claiming these comments only added to misinformation.
And this attempt at a digital cleanup was extensive.
It was. She selectively deleted older posts referencing her cancers or charitable donations on her Instagram account before eventually deleting the entire account altogether. Her blog administrator also participated, selectively deleting postings that mentioned her cancer and specific unverified claims, such as briefly dying during heart surgery.
And when she couldn't control the flow of negative commentary, she pivoted to victimhood.
Establishing an alias Facebook account specifically to defend herself against what she aggressively labeled as bullying from online critics and journalists. The pattern of denial and deflection was immediate and severe.
This brings up one of the most concerning elements revealed by the sources. The apparent complicity, or at the very least, the staggering lack of professional due diligence, from the major media corporations and tech giants that had so enthusiastically validated her story.
We must critically analyze the role of the enablers here. Let's start with her publisher, Lantern Books, the Penguin imprint.
Okay.
When initially approached by investigative journalists, their defense was astonishingly weak. They claimed they hadn't checked the validity of Gibson's cancer claims because the book was only a cookbook.
But the sources indicate that this defense was immediately exposed as disingenuous.
It was. Fairfax Media reported that Penguin had, in fact, taken great interest in her medical narrative. They had specifically quizzed and even videotaped Gibson discussing her cancer story prior to publication, precisely because the illness narrative was featured prominently in the book's preface and was central to the book's marketing appeal.
So what happened once the fraud was exposed?
Penguin finally withdrew the book from sale, and importantly, they faced a legal penalty for their failure to verify the core narrative. They agreed to pay $30,000 to the Victorian Consumer Law Fund as a penalty for failing to validate that the central claims made in the book, which they marketed heavily, were true.
That set a significant precedent.
It did. A precedent for accountability for publishers operating in this sensitive sphere.
What about Apple, the giant corporation that had made her app a default, privileged inclusion for the highly visible Apple Watch launch?
Apple's initial response was defensive. They initially declined to remove the app, stating publicly that their only concern was the app's functionality and that the content was the responsibility of the vendor.
But that position proved untenable very quickly.
Very. They soon deleted the app entirely from the App Store and removed it from all Apple Watch promotional material.
And the sources confirm Apple offered no public explanation for this sudden reversal.
That's correct. But internal company emails later acknowledged that the swift removal would likely be commented upon and discussed externally. The silence was clearly a strategic move to distance themselves quickly and quietly from the fraud, without admitting they had failed in their own vetting process for a key launch partner.
And what about the glossy lifestyle magazines that had actively propelled her to fame?
The sources reveal a collective failure of journalistic responsibility. Elle Australia, after publishing a highly laudatory story about Gibson in December 2014, admitted that they subsequently received anonymous claims and warnings that her entire story was fabricated, and they chose to dismiss them.
The same happened at Cosmopolitan.
Yes, which had awarded her their prestigious 2014 Fun, Fearless Female Social Media Award. They too admitted they had received and dismissed a similar email, warning the magazine that Gibson's entire narrative was a lie.
Did they strip her of the award?
Despite the ultimate confession, Cosmopolitan decided not to, claiming disingenuously that she was reader-nominated and reader-voted. However, the source material contradicts this claim, noting that the magazine's associate editor had stated, "I put forward the nomination myself."
So the magazine was highly instrumental in promoting her.
This systematic failure prompted sharp professional criticism. A respected cancer researcher from the Garvan Institute of Medical Research weighed in publicly, stating that by failing to conduct basic fact-checking, providing unfiltered PR to Gibson's untested and dangerous claims, the uncritical media was deeply complicit in her scam.
They were, in essence, the powerful enablers of this deception.
The digital walls finally closed in, and Gibson made the full admission of fraud in April 2015 during a high-profile interview with the Australian Women's Weekly.
And the quote was just definitive.
Unequivocal. No, none of it is true.
It was a full admission that she had fabricated all her claims of having 6 different cancers, the heart surgeries, and the stroke. However, in that same interview, she immediately pivoted to mitigating the motive.
Right, attributing the deceit not to greed or malice, but to a traumatic and neglectful upbringing. She claimed her estranged mother forced her to care for herself and her brother since the incredibly young age of 5.
This narrative, designed perhaps to elicit sympathy, was immediately challenged.
It was. Gibson's mother, Natalie Del Bello, publicly refuted these claims shortly afterward, calling them a lot of rubbish. She specifically denied Gibson's claim that her brother was autistic and refuted the extreme neglect narrative.
It shows that the habit of fabrication creating sympathetic, dramatic scenarios continued even as she was confessing to the initial massive fraud.
Yes.
The public admission of fraud led directly to rigorous legal action.
Initiated by Consumer Affairs Victoria in May 2016 against Gibson and her company, the Whole Pantry Body Ltd. The core of the complaint was based on false claims regarding her diagnosis, her rejection of conventional treatment, and crucially, the fraudulent charitable donations.
The case progressed through the Federal Court of Australia.
Yes, and in March 2017, the court concluded that the prosecution had successfully proven most of their claims, delivering a definitive legal judgment. The judge concluded that Mrs. Gibson had no reasonable basis to believe she had cancer.
That ruling solidified the fact that her illness narrative was a calculated lie, not merely a misunderstanding.
It did.
It is particularly interesting to examine the psychological dimension introduced in the court proceedings, which seemed to influence the judge's assessment of her intent.
Indeed. The judge acknowledged that Gibson's narrative suggested she may have been acting out of some degree of delusion or a complex psychological state rather than clear, cold criminal intent solely focused on financial gain.
That's an important legal distinction.
It is. However, clinical experts observing the case rejected this softer psychological assessment.
How did experts characterize her actions?
Mark Feldman, a clinical professor of psychiatry who actually coined the term Munchausen's by internet, specifically described her actions as particularly predatory and characterized the entire affair as deceit on a grand scale for personal profit.
We should briefly explain the concept of Munchausen's by internet for the listener.
Certainly. Munchausen syndrome involves fabricating or inducing illness in oneself to gain attention, sympathy, or validation. The by internet variant applies this behavior to online platforms, where the individual, often seeking fame and financial gain in addition to sympathy, creates an elaborate fraudulent persona of suffering or heroism.
Which is exactly what happened here.
In Gibson's case, she fabricated a devastating illness and a miraculous self-cure, leveraging this manufactured heroism for massive commercial success, making the profit motive undeniably central to the deception.
Regardless of the judge's assessment regarding her internal motivation or potential delusion, the legal consequence was a significant financial penalty.
In September 2017, Gibson was fined a $410,000. It is crucial to note that this fine was levied specifically for the making of false claims regarding her donations to charity, which fell under Australian consumer protection law.
And here is where the story of enforcement and genuine accountability takes a very frustrating turn.
It does. Despite the significant fine imposed in 2017, the sources confirmed that as recently as February or March 2025, nearly 8 years later, Belle Gibson has still not paid the fine.
Not at all.
With accumulated interest and legal costs, the debt now exceeds $500,000.
She claimed financial ruin following the expose and subsequent legal battle.
She did. In a 2017 letter later released by the federal court, Gibson claimed to be facing severe financial distress, stating she was $170,000 in debt and only had $5,000 to her name.
Which immediately raised concerns about the difficulty of enforcing a substantial financial penalty.
Exactly. Especially against a figure who rapidly dissolved her corporate structure once exposed.
But the authorities have persisted in attempting to enforce the penalty and recover the funds owed.
Yes. Consumer Affairs Victoria, through the Sheriff's Office of Victoria, has taken serious enforcement actions. The Sheriff's Office conducted search warrants at her home in Northcote in January 2020 and again in May 2021.
And what was the purpose of those raids?
The specific purpose of these actions was to seize saleable items, assets such as jewelry, designer goods, or electronics, that could be liquidated to recoup the unpaid fines.
This prolonged and difficult enforcement process really demonstrates the challenges faced by legal systems when dealing with financial fraud perpetrated through rapid, ephemeral online platforms.
That's right. The money is often generated quickly and then dissipated, leaving few tangible assets behind.
The case becomes a test of whether the legal framework can effectively ensure accountability when the financial damage is done primarily through mass digital deception rather than traditional, easily traceable corporate fraud.
Exactly.
Remarkably, even after the legal judgment, the public disgrace, and the scrutiny of enforcement, Gibson continued to generate new, highly complex controversies.
Suggesting the pattern of identity fabrication was deeply ingrained. The sources detail an astonishing incident in January 2020 when a video surfaced online.
Right. This is the Oromo video.
In the video, Gibson was shown wearing a headscarf and speaking partially in the Oromo language, a Cushitic language spoken in Ethiopian parts of Kenya. She referred to herself by a new name, Sabantu.
What were her claims in this video?
She claimed to have been adopted by the Ethiopian community in Melbourne after 4 years of intensive volunteering. She referred to this adoption as a gift from Allah, completing a profound religious and cultural identity pivot following the collapse of her wellness guru status.
And following the established pattern, this new identity was immediately and publicly refuted.
It was. The president of the Australian Oromo Community Association in Victoria immediately and publicly refuted her claims. He stated definitively that she was not a registered volunteer, not a community member, and not actively working with the community in any capacity.
So is another complete fabrication.
He noted he had only seen her at community events 2 or 3 times and wished for her to stop claiming affiliation with their community.
It is striking how the behavior of fabricating identity, relationships, and affiliations appears to continue, even when faced with massive public and legal consequences.
The impulse to create an elaborate sympathetic narrative seems to transcend the original purpose of the profit-driven health fraud. This latest episode simply reinforces the clinical observation that the root behavior, the need for elaborate, fabricated validation and identity persists, regardless of the consequences.
Finally, we must acknowledge the media legacy of the entire Belle Gibson affair. Despite the fact that the fine remains unpaid, her story continues to be incredibly relevant in popular culture, serving as a defining template for digital deception and wellness fraud.
That relevance is firmly cemented by the sources citing 2 major productions based on her life. First, the 2023 Netflix 2-part documentary, The Search for Instagram's Worst Con Artist.
And a drama series is coming as well.
Second, the upcoming 2025 Netflix drama series, Apple Cider Vinegar, which fictionalizes her story. Her case has become a permanent marker in discussions about online authenticity, trust, and fraud. And these adaptations show a continued public fascination with how easily massive deceit can be achieved in the digital sphere.
This incredible, complicated story summarizes a deeply sophisticated mechanism of online trust where a compelling aspirational narrative about beating impossible, life-threatening odds using only natural methods can completely and dangerously substitute for scientific consensus and professional medical guidance.
Yes, and the sources we have examined show us the devastating consequence of that substitution, particularly for people battling serious illnesses who are seeking genuine, trustworthy information.
The complexity of her deception and the sheer number of victims, from individuals she personally misled into risky medical decisions, to the vulnerable families she used as props, to the charities she defrauded, forces us to seriously consider the question of accountability in the digital age.
We know Gibson was fined $410,000, and despite the sheriff's office efforts, that fine has remained unpaid for years.
This leaves us with a critical 2-part question for you to consider, drawing on the evidence presented in the sources. Firstly, does the existing legal system, which is designed primarily for traditional commercial fraud, adequately address these pervasive cases of mass digital deception, especially when the guilty party manages to rapidly dissipate the funds or effectively claim destitution?
And secondly, for the consumer, the audience of these inspirational figures, what cognitive and practical mechanisms must we all develop to better vet and critically evaluate inspirational figures whose advice might impact fundamental health and well-being, recognizing that an authentic-sounding story is not the same thing as a medical fact?
It is a question of how we ensure that accountability, both financial and moral, is fully realized when the platform of deception is as ephemeral, fast-moving, and expansive as the internet itself. Thank you for joining us for this in-depth analysis of the source material.
Thanks for listening.